So good for everyone to connect in. And this is a second of a three-part series that Paul is taking the lead and sharing with us. And so, first of all, I just want to thank Graham for facilitating all of this, helping to make the engine work, and to Paul for sharing from his wealth of gained knowledge and experience. That's wonderful. So I'm just going to pray for us as we start off here. So Lord, thank you this morning that we can gather as your children, Lord, those that love you and love your world and are wanting to see your kingdom come, Father, on this earth, and that our friends, our family, our neighbors, our countries, Lord, get to experience your life-changing love. So thank you this morning for our time to connect, to gather, to share, to receive some insight, some teaching. And you just pray your blessing, your hand on this time. Amen. Amen. You know, as I was thinking of our time this morning and thinking about the election that's taking place today in the United States of America, where people are faced with a decision of choosing one or the other. This morning we're having a discussion about elders, and we don't have to make a decision between elders or leadership. Really, God has given us the gift of both of those to have as part of who we are as a YWAM family. And just again, thankful for Paul as he helps us to flesh out what it means for elders to be part of our YWAM life. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate John and Graham kind of leading this out and also opening it up across Canada. So all of you that are not part of Western Canada, welcome. We're just glad you're in on this. Just as a background, I want to share a slide with you on my screen. So let's see if we can do that relatively easily. Okay, so I have been working in a research capacity with NAITS, North American Indigenous Institute of Theological Studies. There are several other YWAMers that are involved in this, and one of the things that came up a couple of years ago when I signed up to do this, and maybe none of you have heard the story, but when Dave Skeen graduated with his master's, I went down to be part of the sort of the ceremony. And what they do in NAITS is they, depending on the ethnic background of the students, they do sort of a culturally appropriate graduation program. So in the case of Dave, as a Métis, they brought out a Métis blanket and wrapped Dave and Liz in a Métis blanket, and then Liz called all the family up, which is very, very much First Nations tradition to bring the whole family in. So there's all Dave's brother and sister-in-law and mother and so forth. And then Liz pointed at me and said, "You get up here too." So I went up underneath the blanket, and as Dave was graduating, I was in under the blanket, and I felt very clearly God said to me, "You can be part of this if you want." And so I talked to Terry LeBlanc, who is the NAITS chief leader there, and I said, "Listen, I could be part of this. I don't really need a doctoral degree or anything like this, but if you're doing something, I'd be interested." So that started a journey, and that journey has turned into a research journey, because as I've gone along, they asked me, "Well, what do you want to research?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what I want to research." And as I thought about it, it was just in that transition period where we're at, where we were shifting from a leadership structure that was hierarchical to a decentralized eldership structure. And this has never been done before in an international. There's never been a big mission like YWAM that has, in a sense, deconstructed itself and pushed leadership back to the base level where all of you who are online today, you've been kind of put into a leadership position, whether you have a team of 2 or whether you have a team of 200. At the local level, you are leaders of Youth of the Mission, and the organization has kind of gone that way. And at the same time said, we want to have eldership that are not defined by geographic leadership, but are, in a sense, are sort of a floating eldership in the mission. I don't particularly like the term spiritual eldership, but that's the term that's been used. But they don't necessarily have any defined leadership structure. So, well, that's unprecedented. So to me, that's a great research topic, and also it directly affects myself. So I've got an investment in doing some leadership on this. So here's the definition that I came up with, because you can't really do any research unless you have a definition. And so I kind of worked on this. This is a 2-year process of kind of defining eldership, and I will compare eldership and leadership in just a minute. But at this point, my preliminary definition for elders is this. Elders in YWAM serve a mission modality rather than a congregational modality. Now that's using kind of technical language, but elders in YWAM serve a mission structure, not a church structure. We always say that in YWAM, we're not a church. What are we? We're a mission structure. And this is kind of an interesting thing, because again, in scripture, elders only show up in church structures. They don't show up in mission structures. So number 2, elders model the YWAM values. Well, this is true for all of you, leaders, staff, elders, all of us, in a sense, need to model the values. So in a sense, the values define kind of what we do. The values is an odd collection of sort of semi-doctrinal statements as well as practices. These are the practices of YWAM. And number 3, elders contextualize YWAM in their nation and their language while promoting both unity and diversity within a global mission, which means elders have a personality and a gift and a ministry. And in a sense, the elder relationships, in a very real sense, are holding the mission together relationally, not doctrinally, not organizationally, but in a relational capacity. So this you get this from various people in YWAM who speak about very strongly. John Dawson is one of the ones that probably speaks of this most strongly. It's about those relational connections that we have. And so whether we look around on a Zoom call and we have relationships across the country together in various capacities, some close relationships, some not as close, some we've worked together, sometimes we've done some joint things together, but anyway, those relational bonds, they're sort of family-like. I won't call them exactly family, but they're sort of family-like in terms of emotion. And then number 4, eldership is not an office, but a function of various circles of the YWAM movement. So in a sense, an elder, it doesn't sit in an office as any geographic structure, but it's a relational structure. And so eldering well refers to the integration of all these things. And so this is what I'm researching right now. So this is my definition. I get to find out in YWAM, is this kind of how the organization is viewing itself? Is this how we view ourselves? Is this how you view yourself in YWAM? Anyway, this is part of what I get to research. I'll find out maybe in a year or so whether this is relatively accurate or maybe it's not accurate at all. Anyway, whatever I discover in this, it's good research because I'll discover something. So that's where I'm at. Now, I just wanted to shift the slide here to another one, and this. All right. So here's a little clarification. We talk about leadership and we talk about eldership, and they're not the same thing. In Youth with a Mission, leadership in YWAM happens at the local level. So every one of you who are leading a ministry, again, as I said, whether it's 2 or 200, leadership happens at the local level. And this is where our clear structures happen. And of course, at a local level, you could have a hierarchy of responsibility, you could have different departments, you can have all sorts of different things. And then there's parts of YWAM that are not functioning in a decentralized way, such as University of the Nations, Frontier Missions, King's Kids, YWAM Ships, and there's probably a dozen other YWAM parts that function quite differently than the geographic structure. So in North America, we have 2 area circle teams that function in sort of an eldership responsibility, East and West North America, and all of us all of you are welcome to be part of either an Eastern or Western structure. And that's a place where some eldership will take place, some leadership will take place, some conferencing will take place. It's there to serve the mission. We also have leadership as directed by our charitable societies. So in Canada, the Youth with a Mission name, for example, cannot be used as any sort of legal covering without going through the process of connecting with YWAM Canada Inc. Randy Parizeau is the charitable society in charge of that. So we can't use the name of that, and the charitable name is also linked with leadership. And in comparison, eldership happens in circles of relationship connections. So when eldership happens, it's generally a team, and it generally happens when we're meeting together. So in a sense, we've gone away with geographic hierarchy and gone to an eldership model that is relational, and it's there. And this tends to move more towards the social eldership. Someone like Mua, you've championed this for years, where you've spoken out here in your culture, in the Samoan culture, or in the First Nations culture. Here's how elders function. Here's where they work. Here's their influence. This came up in our last discussion where it was mentioned that the word for eldership in I think it was in New Zealand was the one who sits on the warm place by the fire. Something like that. It's a social, it's sort of our social asset and capital. So we don't exactly have that in our culture, but I think we're moving sort of towards that social eldership and leadership. So I hope this has been helpful. The last time I talked, I got some really good feedback from several of you, some really strong, because people are concerned about this, because it's sort of unclear how this is supposed to work. And I think what we're trying to do is trying to make it work as best as we can within our Canadian context. So we do that in circles. And as we gather here on Zoom, and I'll leave the screen sharing now, But as we meet together on Zoom across the nation, we're kind of creating a circle. It may be just for this meeting, but in this context, in this meeting, we're creating a circle of influence, and there's elders and leaders all together in this circle. So what I wanted to do on this time is to take that working definition. And so last time we talked about what is the difference between working in a Christian mission organization versus a church congregational organization. And we talk about that a lot in YWAM. We often will say YWAM is the mobile multiplying church, or we have an apostolic movement, or we're about taking the gospel out to the nations. Of course, those are interests that come up in church as well, but we're doing it as a mission organization, not as a church. So that's what we talked about last month. This month, I'd like to explore the whole issue of elders and leaders model out the values. And as we model out the values, every one of those value statements is not something that you put up on the wall of your base and have your students memorize. Hopefully, you actually have people
Shut off the video.
who are doing the values. And so you can see that people, when they come into your base or they come into your operating location, they may not see all the values, all 18, 19 values happening any one day, but you can actually look to people who are excellent in the values. So it's not just model yourself after value 14, model yourself after Dave, who exhibits value 14, or model yourself after so-and-so who lives out value 14, or look at Enoch and Jen's family as modeling out value 7. You know, and that's the sort of issue that we're trying to get to as we talk this through, pray it through, think it through, and work together to recreate it. Because the only responsibility for creating this is within a circle. And so if we form a circle, then we have the opportunity to create eldership and leadership and mutual relationships one with another. It's not going to come to you from the top down. However, what can happen in this of the mission, as we had last month, often the organization will commission us into pioneering something. So in a sense, this whole issue of eldership, leadership, diversity, and sort of thing is we are in a pioneering mode. This has never been done before. There is no blueprint for how it is supposed to be done, but we're in the process of doing it. So I love the feedback that I got from the last session. This session, what we're going to do now is we're going to break up into discussion groups. And I think this is going to work because we sort of did a test run on this, and Graham's got this, I think, under control. But we're going to break up into discussion groups of 4 or 5 people. Each one of you will get one of the values. I picked, there's 7 values that talk about leadership or eldership. Each one of the discussion groups will get a value and some questions. And now you don't have to answer all the questions. Just talk about the value and talk about the idea of eldership, leadership in context to the value. Who's modeling these values? And how do these values speak to how we are in this pioneering mode of creating something right now? So I believe we're ready, Graham, if you are, break with us. And then when you come back, would there be a spokesperson from each discussion group that sort of outlines the value and just helps us encapsulate a little bit some of the discussion, and then we'll end with a prayer time together as well. All right.
Sorry, Paul, can you just repeat the question again? Sorry, just to make sure I get it.
The question will come up. The question will be there with in the breakout.
Oh, great. Thank you.
It'll be there.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question, Dan.
Yep.
Because I'm about to give you instructions.
Okay.
If you guys open your chat, you'll see that I've dropped a file in there. Now, what you need to do is to open that file now. Before I send you to your breakout rooms, you need to have it open on your desktop.
Thank you. We're learning, and obviously, this was an attempt here to kind of get as broad a conversation going as possible. Just by a show of thumbs up or anything, or thumbs down, how was your discussion group? Yeah, it's part of I think where we're at, and Blaze I think was hitting on it as we came back together, is in a sense we're in the middle of inventing this as we go. This is there is no set pattern for how this is going to develop, and so I think in the process this gets worked out in circles. And circles, the Zoom is sort of an approximate circle. We don't have enough time to really talk and discuss and have coffee together and have a meal together and really kind of work through some of these issues. But I think as we're learning on this and we're working on this, this is just an attempt to keep the conversation going. Realize that it's not just because I'm doing research on this that it's important. We're in the middle of creating something. I think as Blaze was saying, we're also, it's something about the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. An insight from First Nations where culture and sort of the eldering asset is a part of the culture. So they see elders as an asset of culture. That those elders are constantly there, but they're also constantly disappearing. And then the next generation takes on their role. So we're in that process too. There's going to be a time when there's no longer a founder circle because there's no longer founders. And it will pass on from generation to generation if YWAM is going to be successful. So we've got to figure out as best we can, even with our cultural biases, because in Western culture, in Western Canadian culture, there's very little value for elders socially. Within church cultures, depending on your denominational background, you may have a very high value for elders if you come from sort of traditional Brethren Baptist or denominations where they do have elders that function within churches. But again, this has never been attempted in an international mission. It gets worked out in some circles within the mission much stronger because in fact, some of the, like the University of the Nations has a very strong geographically defined hierarchical structure because universities do. But that's not the rule for the whole mission. So maybe just unmute your mic and maybe one person from each group just sort of give a quick overview of what you discussed. And if there's something that you feel would be a contribution to the whole, can you go ahead and do that?
So, Paul, I'll just share first in our group because I have to leave in 3 minutes. Our group would have asked me to share. I'm going to try and see if I can cover everything. I'm not good at remember everything, Doc. So if you have time later, Doc, feel free to.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we discussed the value 10. So one of the this part that we sort of share from my just to my own take on I think even us as Pacific Islanders that have born and raised into the community, that the structure of elders is functioned within the level of families and a community. Left home and joined to YWAM, which is very much Western structures, and we had to learn that. We had to learn that structures in order to function in terms of in being a leaders. And then after many years, now we talk about elders, which is even as a struggle trying to balance that. Um, but there's something very important there, because when Paul talk about elders, uh, although we have been away from home, but there's something to me personally in my heart. It sounds familiar and it feels familiar, because those were value that was injected into our heart, into our life in a very young age. So my take on, I think leaders train leaders and release leaders. Elders doesn't, to me, my own opinion, doesn't do that. Elders speak to life of leaders, um, community, and praise and honor elders. So sometimes there's a bit of a confuse of, which is normal. I think is part of the process for all of us, to really see. Even in our community here, we constantly, even in with our uh, indigenous community, it's a struggle, because you live in a two different world. Uh, there's a Western cultures, and then there's the value within the culture, um, which is it define the leadership and define an elder. So from an indigenous community, there's no such thing as trying to define an elders. It's natural. It is within the families. Is straight away given an honor, and elders and family recognize the elders by the fruit and by the investment and by the years investment into families. So for us as YWAM family, it's a journey. I believe it's some of us might get it right away, and some might not. Um, and that's to me, that's the sense the discussion that we have, um, is to just to recognize of how important two leaders have a very important role too as well. And an organization or a structure will not be functioning without the role of the leaders. It's very important. Any elder on the other side, it's more sort of embraced more than just a leader, but those who involve within the community. So it's a community sort of relation, very strongly supported. I think what Paul mentioned earlier, it's a relational. Um, I can have a very good relationship with a leader, but not always necessarily I have to run to the leader for all my problem, but I can run to an elders, because I know their function, their way of this, how do you do this stuff. So um, I might have missed a lot of stuff, Doc. So you can fill in later on, but that's my little
Thank,
piece.
thank you, Moa. And I think what you're voicing is certainly, this is one of the streams of influence right now in YWAM, that that the eldering role is kind of drifting towards a more cultural understanding, or a social understanding, or a family understanding, like you're expressing. So you're right. It's going to be, there isn't going to be right now a well-defined role on this, but it's part of the discussion, and we really value your contribution. So as you disappear off this, anyone else like to add to this?
Well, it was just Moavu and me in that group. But this repeats some of what I wrote to you last month, Paul.
Yes.
There are leadership functions and eldership functions, different kinds of tasks. And if um, the leadership tasks, the practical, tangible things, mostly happen at the base level. But if there's something at a more macro level, where does the responsibility and the authority to do those tasks reside? If the elders don't have it, it feels like there's a hole in the middle of this circle.
I think you're probably accurate, Doug.
Yeah.
So
And-
this is, I think, this is sort of, but I don't know if it's going to be worked out. It's not going to be worked out internationally and come from the top down. It's going to probably happen in various circles.
Yeah.
So
And
that issue.
if I could,
Identify the whole, see how we can work with it.
okay.
Yeah.
A lot of
That's
the,
a great observation.
Maybe I'll jump in because our group did value 7, is it 7, about being decentralized. And I'm not sure we answered any of the questions, but our discussion sort of centered around that it's a beautifully exciting and dangerous upside down sort of thing, actually. And, where we would have generally thought that, you put somebody, for instance, if we said Mike Talon is the leader, of YWAM Western Canada, and here's all the guys who fall under your jurisdiction, sort them out, Mike, like the responsibility, it's your responsibility, get everybody straightened out, but the way it's worded actually in the value is that every ministry has the privilege and responsibility to invite eldership, to make those relationships and invite that eldership. And so it puts the responsibility on the ministry and on the, on the local people to invite and make relationship with elders, to give permission to people to speak into their lives and to, and so it's, Chris was saying, like, it's like the upside down kingdom. It's actually quite a beautiful thing, and it gives, there's so much potential for growth, for innovation, for new things to happen. It's very freeing in some ways and liberating, and so much potential for growth, but it's also quite dangerous because, like, what if people don't invite eldership, or what if they only invite eldership that agrees with them? You could be my elder because you have the same ideas as me. So it's kind of like a beautifully dangerous thing. And one of the other observations was that it works very well in some cultures. It sort of flows more naturally in some cultures, and in some places it's a really hard sell to not say this is where the buck stops, and so I'm not sure that we drew any other conclusions. Any of my group mates, if you have something to add, please feel free.
Thank you a lot, Bobby. If you are familiar with the YWAM values and you read that value that they were looking at, that responsibility is a shift in wording from past. So glad you picked up on it. I would agree with you. This is a beautifully dangerous thing. And it's going to depend a lot on all of us corporately learning how to walk in the Spirit together to make something like this happen.
Yeah, it's like if it works, wow, and it works. It does seem to work, by and large. And we're sort of sorting out how does it work for us, and how does it work in different places. But the danger, of course, is where it doesn't work, and nobody's inviting eldership or listening and being covered. So, yeah.
Thank you.
The group I was part of with Jeff and Rhonda, we were looking at value 11, which is servant leadership. YWAM is called to servant leadership. And they both were able to give practical examples of where just what Bobby was saying, where they have invited what was the structural leadership, the CLT or the regional leadership, into situations, but the leadership, the CLT, responded in what I would say an eldership way. And so as opposed to giving directive about what they must and must not do, and both Pierre and Paul were mentioned specifically, they came in to share relationally, to share some wisdom, to share some advice, that, you know, so it was an invitation, and they were welcomed in. And so our experience, I think, within Canada, in a large way, has been that we've been privileged to have a leadership that has functioned in a lot of ways already with a eldership kind of lean. So that was our value 11, exhibit servant leadership.
I'll just share one slide with you. It's just over in the left-hand side. Leaders may be elders, some elders lead. Sometimes. Just a thought. I'm wondering, Graham, if we could break up into rooms again, and then just let's pray for this. Pray for this, because I think it has been pointing out, Bobby pointed out, it's a dangerously wonderful time. Doug pointed it out. There seems to be a hole in things. We're in the process. We're in this together, working on it. We've got COVID-19 that's also introduced a massive external shift in the mission. So if we could close our time breaking into groups and pray for 10, 15 minutes. We won't reconvene after this, but we will reconvene in a month. And we'll continue the discussion. We're going to talk about culture, our elders and leaders, and how their culture will affect us as a whole. So if you have to sign off, go ahead and sign off, but understand that time-wise, but otherwise break into groups of prayer for 10 minutes, and then that'll be the end. Once you're done praying, you can linger as long as you want on the prayer rooms, but once you're done praying, that'll be the end of this session. So thank you for all of you who signed in on this Zoom call. And if you've got feedback and you want to put it down in on an email or something like that, I'm welcome to receive it. I've certainly appreciated the feedback from the last session.